Thank you so much for coming. My name is Matthew Souls. I am a professor of architecture at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, otherwise known as SALA, at UBC. The main reason I'm standing here, well, there's two main reasons. One is that I'm, of course, a sort of perennial student, a perpetual student of the work of authors. And also, I am the chair of the outreach committee at UBC. So in that role, I work with colleagues to organize these wonderful, exciting events. So today, or this talk right now, is the last event of a full day of events. We started at 9:30 this morning. For all of you who've been here all day, amazing, what a stimulating marathon. And for those of you who are joining us right now, yeah, let's hear it. So for those of you who are just joining us, welcome aboard this awesome journey that we're on. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now, I often say that it's important, colonization is an ongoing project in this settler construct of Canada. It's ongoing. And reconciliation is vital process that I think is important for all of us, but extra important for those of us who work directly with the land in architecture, landscape architecture, and planning. So I think all day, hearing all the talks, it's always important to kind of question what we're hearing and what we're talking about, I think, through this kind of lens of how do we become more ethical, healthful, holistic stewards with everyone who's here, and of course the people who've been here much longer than settlers have. So let's keep that in mind as we hear tonight's speaker present her work. So today's symposium, I mentioned the outreach committee at SALA. It's, since you're all here, I want to share with you very briefly the larger event series that SALA is putting on this fall. So today is the first event. There will be 4 subsequent events, and they're all listed here. I encourage you to learn more about them online you can use this QR code. You can sign up to our newsletter, our weekly e-blast at SALA. But I'd like to just quickly point out that the ones in yellow are a kind of theme of this year's fall lecture series, which is all on climate change. So at SALA, we as a faculty kind of discuss and choose a theme each year that we think is super important, that is important to our faculty, to our students, and I think the broader landscape architectural, urban design community. So of course, I can't stress enough what we all know, the question of climate change. How do architects, landscape architects, and designers design with intent and impact in relation to this pressing problem? So I encourage you to come to these 3 talks. October 1st is Pamela Conrad. She will be presenting right in this room. She's visiting from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Very innovative person who has created an initiative that fuses advocacy, design, and education to advance cutting-edge ways to minimize carbon and create increasingly ecologically successful environments. And then there will be So What Now? That's actually a panel discussion that will be a vibrant debate, Q&A sessions with 2 SALA alumni and 2 faculty at SALA. So that'll be a kind of really rich debate. Adam Reisenek, who is one of our colleagues at SALA, who's really a leading researcher around carbon, will be moderating that event. And then the last one in the yellow is Andreas Kapar, who will be visiting us from Milano, coming from Italy. And he is the founder and creative lead of a very interesting practice called LAND that is doing quite remarkable work in urban design, landscape architecture. And then the book launch that is there, that is a very important also event. That is the only, or that event will take place at Inform Interiors. And our dear colleague, Leslie Van Duzer, who moderated one of the earlier sessions today, it's a book launch for her latest book that is it's a monograph on another Sala colleague, Bill Peckett's work. So if you're not familiar with Bill Peckett, he's a very important contributor to the built environment of this region and beyond. And this monograph is long overdue. We're super excited, so we invite you out to all of these. Please take the QR code, and we hope to see you there. So today's symposium is obviously a centennial celebration. Arthur Erickson was born in Vancouver in 1924. Today's event is actually the penultimate event, the second to last event of a whole series of things that started in about March 2024. And they included a premiere of a documentary film, street festivals, a whole series of talks that started in Winnipeg and moved across the continent. And the Arthur Erickson Foundation was key in leading that effort of all of those events. So today's symposium is a collaboration between the Arthur Erickson Foundation and Sala. And Sala has a very rich tradition of every year having what's called the Arthur Erickson Memorial Lecture, where we bring an outside practitioner from outside Vancouver that we think resonates with the legacy of Arthur to share their work to Vancouverites, to the Sala community. So in many ways, today and this lecture that you're all here for now is a kind of synthesis of the architecture or Arthur Erickson Foundation's ongoing centennial events and our annual tradition. They're kind of merging here tonight. So Sala and the Foundation are co-sponsors. Tonight's event is funded by the Government of Canada. We are very grateful for their support. And I would just like to take a few minutes to thank the individuals at the Foundation and Sala that have been so critical to putting on this amazing, exciting day that started at 9:30. So At Sala, I would like to thank my colleagues on the outreach committee. So Rana Abu-Ghanem who's here, Inga Roker, who is also here, Tamra Ross, who's also here. I think many of you have seen her at the front desk, and our outreach specialist, Emma Fennell, who is also at the front desk. So they have put in a tremendous amount of work. This could not have happened without them, so thank you all. I'd also like to thank, there's 4 Sala students who have volunteered all day to help make this happen. Anya, Bashra, Conrad, and Gabe, huge thanks to you. And with the Foundation, I mean, the Foundation is an amazing organization that has many people involved. At the kind of center of the effort to organize today is Bernadette Ma and David Kovo. Of course, they were always consulting with their larger group, but huge thanks to their leadership for today. So, and then of course, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of the people that directly participated in this event. So Clinton Cuddington, my colleague at Sala, Tanya Gutierrez Monroy, Barry Johns, Eva Matsuzaki, Michael Prokopau, Leslie Van Duzer, and Adele Weider. Huge thanks to them. I mean, it's a lot to kind of, formulate your ideas and present them in a cogent, stimulating fashion. And I think we've received a kind of wealth, a cornucopia of ideas today. Also, I want to thank Win Bialaska and Nick Milkovich that also put a lot of work planning to present today, and unfortunately couldn't be here. So they're here in spirit, and a huge thanks to both of those two. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Brigitte Shim. When we had a lot of meetings on the outreach committee and with folks from the Foundation to to think who could be a good person to invite to do this evening lecture, this kind of fusion of the Arthur Erickson Memorial Lecture and the ongoing foundation efforts. And we had some wonderful conversations about that, right? I mean, it's not so easy to figure out who would be a great person, right? And in our conversations, we kind of landed on some characteristics that we thought would be good. One, we thought, well, it would be an ideal person for this. Someone who worked at Arthur's office. It's the centennial celebration. That would be good. It would be good that we could see in their work, as folks that are appreciative of the work, analysts of the work, thinkers about the work, that there was some sort of connection. You could kind of create an argument, a set of lines that connected the work of Arthur and this person's or this practice, their work. So what I guess we were looking for is, have they done kind of exquisite, sensitive work around sight? Is it a practice that is really attuned to the particularities of a location? Is it a practice that's attuned to the qualities of light and their shifting nature, how architecture is a kind of apparatus to capture and shape experience with light? Is it a practice that kind of generates a cadence, a rhythm, a sequence? Is it a practice that is very careful and very thoughtful about materiality? So, we were, they can kind of land on these characteristics. Who might this be? And because Arthur Erickson's office was so kind of, a huge presence in this country. I think Barry or maybe it was Eva this morning mentioned, is it 300 or 400 people that moved through that office, that worked at that office? Incredible number of people, a credible number of amazing people that have gone on, that had amazing careers with Arthur, and then many of them amazing, exciting careers after Arthur. So in many ways, it's not so easy to be like, who is this person? Because it's so many great people. In many ways, the office, of course, was like a second training. You graduate from your B.Arch or M.Arch program and then find yourself in this office and have a whole new education. But as we were kind of faced this difficult task of who this person would be, Brigitte Shim's name did keep reappearing, and it was the one that kept reappearing in the conversation. So on one hand, it was hard, but then it was, on the other hand, kind of clear. So we, said, well, let's see if she'd be interested in doing it, and reached out to ask Brigitte if she would be interested, and it was, music to our ears right away, said, yes, this is something I would be very excited to do. And we had a wonderful telephone conversation, and immediately Brigitte told me about this incredible circumpolar travel junket that she did with Adrian Clarkson at, for the federal government, a kind of cultural journey to Iceland and other Scandinavian countries. And then it became, and then she talked about the time where she worked at the Laurel Street office. And, instantaneously in the conversation, you're like, yes, right. I think we chose well, and we're very fortunate that she has agreed to come and share her ideas and the work of the practice. So, Brigitte and her partner, A. Howard Sutcliffe, founded Shim-Sutcliffe Architects in 1994 in Toronto. They were working together before that, but they formalized the practice in 1994. And since that time, they've done quite an impressive number of very carefully calibrated projects in Canada, the United States, and abroad. In my opinion, and I think we know many others, their practice is unquestionably one of the most important and impactful practices operating today. And of course, they've received the recognition one would expect of a practice operating in the way they operate. So because of their contributions to the discipline of architecture, to our culture and our society at large, they have received Shim-Sutcliffe, 16 Governor General medals for architecture from the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada, the RAIC, a kind of remarkable number of awards. Both Brigitte and Howard received the Order of Canada in 2013, a kind of joint award. And in 2021, they received the RAIC Gold Medal, its highest honor. Brigitte is also a hugely important educator in our country and beyond. She is a full professor at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design at the University of Toronto, where she has been a leading figure since 1988. She has taught at many institutions, including Harvard, Yale, EPFL in Switzerland, and many others. She's also, I think, a tireless advocate for design excellence. It's not only that her practice is so special and remarkable. One of the first times I met Brigitte was when she was serving as a juror on Sala's Margulies Prize, as an example. You know, she'd sort of flown out and participated in adjudicating that very important award. So she serves on a lot of these juries, international, national, and local. So she's quite tireless, I think. Judging on all this. But yesterday, so she woke up in Toronto, got the plane from Toronto to YVR, landed at 9:50. I picked her up at her hotel with Brian Broster, who's in the second row. We picked her up. She just, as far as I could tell, the Uber had arrived. She'd run in, left her bags, run out. We jump in the car. She said, I need a coffee. We go to Milano, get a coffee. It's 2 seconds, and then we were off. And we go see Epic 2, the Epic 2 house, one of Arthur's, great houses. We have this amazing conversation, this amazing tour. It's being renovated right now. Brian got us into it. And then they're like, can we go to Epic 1? I had already tried to do some things to get us into Epic 1. The owners said, sorry, we're going to be away. We can't do it. So I told them in advance we can't do it. But after the amazing stimulation of Epic 2, as we're leaving, both Brigitte and Brian are like, let's just go and just walk around the landscape. And I was like, I felt very uncomfortable. I was like, I've literally been told we can't go. And they were completely not turned off by this. They were like, no, we should go. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna trespass. There's probably cameras, all that stuff. And I was like, Brigitte, this is on you. Long story short, we go. As it turns out, one of the owners happened to be there, did not go on their trip. It was happy to see us. We had an amazing tour. But what I want to say is we then continue to go to many other Erickson projects, not really even stopping for food. This culminated, she's come from Toronto in the morning, right? This literally culminated with Brian giving us a fantastic tour of Arthur's own house and garden, with me on the flashlight of my phone, leading us through the forest over in the yard, really scared that people are going to trip. It's like, oh my God, Bridget's going to break her ankle before tomorrow's talk and all this. And I had the feeling, we had to, I was like, at 9 p.m., it was like, we need to end this. We need to go for dinner. I had the feeling that Brigitte would maybe go 24 hours or 36 hours. So I think this is somehow her passion for the built environment, her interest in discussing it, exploring it. And I was struck the whole day how the conversations just moved between careful, observations and considerations of construction details, of the kind of way the concrete was textured and finished, or how the light was moving, to larger considerations around, how does one preserve these kind of important cultural things through all of the bureaucracy and funding challenges that involve. So swinging from policy, governmental issues, code issues, down to the very close details. So I'm very excited to bring to the stage what I think is the tireless and remarkable passion and energy for architecture that Brigitte kind of embodies. Brigitte, please come on up.
Wow. Thank you so much, Matthew, sharing all of our travel details with everyone. But it was truly a remarkable day because it filled in a lot of pieces for me. As a student working in Arthur's office in the early 80s, I never went to see either of the epic projects. I think they were occupied by the original owners. So to see them with their landscape was really, really wonderful. We also saw some buildings at UBC, courtyards around the faculty club. We actually went to visit the Museum of Anthropology and seeing the new water landscape outside and the plant material. So it was really, truly enriching and so special. So first of all, we're in this wonderful room. How great is this space? And it just, there's an intimacy that is really, really appreciated. And the fact that, the bleachers create a kind of almost like an embrace around the kind of central audience. And I just feel like it has a wonderful scale and intimacy. So first and foremost, it's an honor to be invited to speak at this centenary symposium commemorating Arthur. I want to thank UBC, Sala, and the Arthur Erickson Foundation for your kind invitation. And what an amazing day. So each of the sessions, I think for me also filled in pieces and reconfirmed certain things, but also added to my understanding and depth of Arthur. So it was like a kind of a mosaic that was created throughout all of the sessions in the day. And I just feel like the Erickson Foundation and Sala have done a really great job of sort of crafting a kind of a way of understanding Arthur from a variety of perspectives. So really congratulations to all of you. So my title of my talk is "Sight is Paramount," which is a quotation from one of the kind of Arthur pieces of one of his texts. And in a way, I wanted to really weave together certain things. So I'm not an art historian. I'm not a kind of, and even though I teach in a university, I typically teach design studio. I've taught the history and theory of landscape architecture, a lot of courses, but I'm not a kind of historian in any way. So let's go. So Howard and I are both Canadians because we were born somewhere else. Howard was born in Yorkshire, England, and came to Canada on a really rough crossing of the QE2. It was a really bad winter crossing, and most people were sick the whole time. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and I arrived in Canada when I was about 7 years old in February in the middle of a snowstorm. And for me, the memory of making snow angels and making my first snowman was so vivid because I came from a very tropical place. Both of us have always been interested in serendipity and how it changes the course of your life. So in a way, Howard and I met in architecture school, third-year architecture, and we've really kind of really developed both a personal life and an architectural life together. We both worked in Vancouver when we were students. So Howard worked for Paul Merrick, and when we were in Vancouver, we got to see his amazing treehouse in North Vancouver, amazing glass details of just butting, glass together to create the doors and windows in his house. And I worked for Arthur in the early 80s in the Laurel Street studio. And I thought the session with Eva and Barry and David just described the kind of energy of the studio and the experience of being there. And in a way, both of these West Coast architects shared with us their local knowledge, and we understood how important the work was going on in Vancouver at that time. Howard and I were also fortunate to work for other architects. He worked for Ron Tom when he graduated from school, and then Barton Myers, and then KPMB after that. So that was kind of Howard's early formation post-architecture school at Waterloo. I worked for George Baird on the right, and Barry Sampson. The firm was called Baird Sampson Architects. They were my first bosses, but also became mentors, and I actually taught with them later. George did a book called The Space of Appearance, looking at the work of Hannah Arendt and the role of her thinking in relation to the space of appearance in public life. And I was a research assistant for George. Barry Sampson was an amazing practitioner, educator, and really both a mentor and a friend, and they became really key for both of us. So Howard and I chose to live in Toronto. Even though we had worked in Vancouver, Toronto has been our home. And I really like this gritty photograph taken by Stephen Evans. It's a little bit out of date, but you see these kind of tall towers with this gritty kind of industrial foreground. And I really like the contrast between the kind of the towers almost emerging out of this kind of railway lands. One of the speakers earlier today talked about Expo 67. So 2 years after our family arrived in Canada, we all went to Expo, and Howard's family went to Expo as well. And we rode the monorails, we went into the Buckminster Fuller Dome, we went to Habitat, we checked out the bathrooms, and really architecture was the star of the show. And in a way, I feel like as a kind of young kid, it was just super inspirational and made you think about the role of built form and its impact on a community. And for Canada, it was really a coming of age of design, and architecture was the star of the whole show. And Canadian architects played a really critical part in defining who we are as a country. In Arthur's publication in 1975, he had drawings of the kind of pavilion that he worked on. And he said that some people argue that international expositions are a waste of time and money, but they are but then almost everything comes down to a waste of effort and money. So the question is how to waste it well. So Arthur, right? To me, expos are important, not only as international exchanges, but they fulfill a deep instinctive need for people to have a festival. So at Expo 67, in a way, it was the first fair to use themes. So Canadian architects were asked to demonstrate different construction techniques related to each of the themes. So being from the West Coast, Arthur was given wood and as a construction material and asked to build man in community. So in a way, what was so interesting was it was a large span with the bottom edge revealing a glulam box beam of over 100 feet. And they had problems getting it from the West Coast to the East Coast because it had to be on a railway passing through the Rocky Mountains. So there was all kinds of technical issues. And then although the beams were 6 feet deep, they decreased in size towards the apex. So in a way, this was kind of a very big technical challenge of the piece itself. And the exhibit really changed several times. So they had an idea, but it didn't work out. So there was this kind of, the interior exhibition was actually very evolved. And the garden that was designed for it made a really poor start during the typical Montreal winter in April. But then Arthur said he was so happy because he learned afterwards from many people that the tranquility of the space provided a special haven for them during the crowded days of Expo. So in a way, I'm sure everyone has a copy of this book. So for me, when I saw this book, I had never met Arthur Erickson. I didn't really know who he was. I had been to this pavilion, Man and Community, and saw it was in this kind of crazy space, but I didn't really know that it was designed by Arthur Erickson. But I got this book, which was done in 1977, maybe, early first or second year architecture school. It was published by Tundra Publication. It was printed in Montreal, and it blew my mind. So in a way, what was so interesting and important was these bold, large format images, full frame, right to the edge of the paper. The front cover had UBC, and then once you got inside, it had not only images like the Man and Community, but it had amazing drawings. So sometimes it was just a full frame image, but then other times there was the plan or section and the photographs side by side. So throughout the book, there's like maybe 10 or 12 plates that are like this. So as a young architecture student, you could actually see the plan and the photograph side by side. There was no other publication about Canadian architecture that had this kind of graphic strength, the range of photographs, and the power of the visual experience. You almost entered the spaces of the book as a young architecture student. So I was a kid from Toronto via Jamaica, and the only physical building of Arthur's that I had ever been in was Roy Thompson Hall. The interior was this quite interesting monotone landscape, like gray on gray on gray, and the exterior was this truncated glass-clad form. It was quite monumental, but it was in a very unmonumental site. It was kind of like a mid-block site downtown. So in a way, when I ended up agreeing to work in Vancouver, I was kind of scratching my head going, well, this is kind of like based compared to the book, this image of Roy Thompson Hall was kind of like, you know, really? I don't know. So I was left sort of a bit uncertain. So arriving in Vancouver, walking around Robson Square, the first thing that happened to me was at the corner of Robson and Hornby, I actually followed a series of steps. And the steps really led me to a garden. So I'm thinking this is the major intersection of a huge city, and their urban corner was not urban, but it was actually a landscape oasis. And I thought for me, that first experience of kind of entering through this kind of dense green, kind of verdant corner was really special. So this photograph was used earlier in Eva's presentation, and in a way, I didn't take pictures when I was in the office, like I didn't have a Polaroid camera, so in a way I had to use this image, and in a way, you have to understand, January 1981, this huge space that Eva talked about, the kind of architecture of the space actually created a studio culture. When I arrived, they had no desk because it was so busy. So there were these side spaces off of the main big space. And I ended up sitting next to a guy named Bing Tom. He was leaving the studio and I was just arriving. He was really chatty and we had really great conversations. And I was so lucky that we overlapped. After 3 years of architecture school at Waterloo, I had a few co-op stints. I had never been in a studio where there were so many amazing female architects. It was just a total revelation. I had been like the girl in the office, there were other secretaries, but I had never even been in a studio where other architects were female architects. So you have the amazing Eva Mazusaki, there was a woman named Sonia Lukaitis who worked on a lot of projects with Alan Bell. She had actually been to Baghdad. After working in the big studio, I actually got to work on a residential project. And so I worked with Inara Kunditz and Sandy Truen, who worked with Nick Miklovic in this kind of upper little area, which had a beautiful view over Falls Creek. So this kind of ability to see the mix of residential and larger scale projects, but to see this kind of really vital, busy, active studio and the role of women in architecture was really exceptional and really is a memory that has stayed with me. In a way, the first session today, I think Eva and Barry really stressed the role of the model. And in a way, these are some photos of the Bagley Wright model. I actually got to do a visit to the Bagley Wright house. I think there were a lot of border issues, and they were trying to make sure we kind of went as a family so that they didn't get caught at the border. But it was such a great experience having seen all the models in the studio to actually visit that project. An incredible collaboration between Arthur and Cornelia. The landscape was spectacular, the built form was remarkable, but these models made you understand that they were not precious. They were really a working tool, and I think Eva and Barry were so articulate in describing and emphasizing that the model was just a tool to achieve a kind of built form. And in a way, the kind of ability to cut pieces out and stick new pieces in and to use little push pins to kind of hold them together, and that Eva described no glue was the mantra, and because it was actually about a kind of an adaptability and using the model to continually recalibrate your thinking about the project. So in a way, for me, that was so important. In a way, I learned at some point that the model in the Laurel Street office didn't always sit there, and there used to be a reflecting pool. And in a way, this kind of photograph that I got from the Erickson family archives shows Arthur working on plant placement and in the outdoor reflecting pool. And then in a way, this is the same photograph maybe that was shown earlier of the kind of three-block Robson Square model. And then in a way, this photograph was also shown earlier in Barry and Eva's presentation. I received this from the Arthur Erickson family archives. But in a way, I just think what's so important is to see the scale of the model. So it would have been from here across the whole stage. You could walk around it, and you could at any point stick your head in and see pieces of the law courts, understand the role of the public realm. And in a way, I just think the idea that it's not just a model, but it's a kind of three-dimensional tool to test ideas. And when you think about the complexity of a program like the courthouse, government office buildings, cultural spaces, it was really the right tool at the right time to bring together so many disparate pieces. So this kind of idea of a working model is something, as a young architecture student, was super powerful and really impactful for me. During our time in Vancouver, we visited Arthur's urban projects. I still marvel at the Macmillan Bodell building, the relationship of solid and void, the depth and plasticity of the urban facade, I just think is really remarkable. And then the idea that this entire building descends into a reflecting pool. So really incredible. So while I did not ever visit either of the EPIC projects, we did check out a lot of residential projects, some of them illegal, some of them not so illegal. You know, kind of from Matthew's description, I don't really take no for an answer, and I usually like to ask for forgiveness after and never ask for permission. But here you learn that a building can also be a bridge. Inside materials can occupy outside spaces, and that we also learned that you don't need glass to create space. And so this idea of outdoor spaces that are covered but really part of the spatial experience, I just think is such an important lesson from Arthur. So in a way, this book, I think in 1975, really was so powerful, and that the role of photography cannot be underestimated. The quality of the photography in that book, he shifts from black and white to color throughout the whole thing. And it just, I think, for anyone thinking about what is Canadian architecture, it defines it so eloquently and beautifully. Now, if you look closely at the table of contents, you'll see that Arthur chose to present both residential projects and public projects. And I think that the fact that, you know, they had already finished Simon Fraser and were working on projects of a public scale was actually different from many other architects of his age and that point in time of Canadian architecture. So this kind of duality, so he could have just gone and shown all public work, but instead he chose to show a balance of the two because in a way, especially from our amazing day yesterday, the houses are a laboratory. They're so key in a lot of the thinking process. So to go to Epic 1 and then to see Robson Square, they're so connected, and the experiments of Epic 1 allowed him to do some of the things he did in Robson Square. And just to be able to be in that residential space, you imagine and you see the way that house as an experiment shaped the way he could talk about what he wanted in the public realm of Robson Square. So when you guys were doing your walking tour, I was looking so closely and revisiting some of these spaces through the lens of being in Epic 1, and really, really interesting. So in a way, what I want to do is use Arthur's words to talk about the way he read the few key things. And I think they've been mentioned before, the issue of sight, light, cadence, and space. So in a way, this is just a quote. Sight is paramount, which is the title I chose for this talk. So sight is paramount for me. This is on page 14 of his book, because it has always been the rich source of inspiration. In fact, I have often thought that I was more of a landscape designer than an architect, since I tend to take a structural approach to landscape and a landscape approach to architecture. I could never conceive of a building apart from its setting. To me, architecture means unifying the duality of site and building. The dialogue between building and setting is the essence of architecture. And one of the projects we saw yesterday was a small house in a kind of regular neighborhood. It was like a forgotten house that Arthur had done, but maybe wasn't part of the main office. And that project was defined by the landscape hedges. The hedges actually shaped the building, and it was so critical to the reading of the project. And it was so, in a way, when we saw that house, the kind of quote just made it even more powerful, that he saw himself as a landscape designer more than an architect. And I just think that for me is and seeing the houses again, that it was just totally reinforced. So I would say for Howard and I, we're continually shifting our reading between built form and nature. And we see time as a material that we work with and landscape as a material. Time offers architects the possibility of reimagining and rethinking ideas. So this is a site that we've been working on for 30 years. A lot of little projects. Our first client was Barbara Frum, and we worked on the same site, and most of the pieces are not that big, but there was a continual experimentation. So this is what we call our ravine guest house, and it sits in a Toronto ravine. So many of our projects are often small in scale, but there's always a need to claim a much bigger territory through the active engagement between architecture and landscape. As architects, Howard and I are always trying to situate you in a specific place. So in this view, we're creating a foreground through our architecture. We're using a Profilit industrial glass cantilevered out to create a covered outdoor space, which is really only there to allow you to view the native Toronto ravine. So everything in the background is found, it's already there and had nothing to do with us, it's Mother Nature, but we're creating the foreground to be able to view that found condition. We're always searching for ways to make built form that resonates with its natural context to really create meaningful places. So this is a view of a project of ours in Muskoka. It's called Point William, which is at the southern end of the Canadian Shield. This aerial view, you can see the choreography between landscape, rock, built form, which is a kind of subtle dance. And then we're always trying to fuse the building and site to almost become a single entity. So we're combining weathering steel, weathering wood to really allow the building to emerge out of this ancient granite rock. And we're always trying to harness the power of the site. And so we agree totally with Arthur's statement that site is paramount. And our reading of site is as a transformative tool enabling us to make place. So we live in where the Canadian Shield is. I think of the shield as a granite necklace around Hudson's Bay, and our pre-Cambrian shield is about 2 billion years old. So sometimes as an architect, what you remove is actually more important than what you keep. So this enormous granite outcropping used to be the foundation for a wing of a previous building. It took us about a year to convince our client to remove this existing building in order to reveal this found piece of granite. They were using it as a cheap foundation. They didn't have to build a kind of concrete foundation wall because the granite was so sturdy. This is another view of that same granite outcropping. And in a way, I think this kind of idea of removing is actually more powerful than adding is something that we think about a lot. So on the left are a series of sketches. Kenneth Frampton came to visit the project, and he didn't want us to talk about the project at all, and he spent his time making a series of sketches, looking at the rock and understanding the qualities of the rock as part of his kind of ability to absorb and understand the space. As architects, we also need to address the restoration and rehabilitation of existing buildings along with new construction. So in this image, you're seeing the rock, and then you're seeing an existing 1907 vernacular building that we have reimagined and reconstructed. So this is a view of the original building circa 1907, which reflects a very typical Southern Ontario vernacular condition, a kind of core with a porch all around it. The existing building was falling apart. We agreed to keep the footprint and the silhouette. But what we did is we kind of tried to reinforce the porch-like condition around the building, so the core and the porch made more visible. This is a view from the inner zone where you're viewing out to the reimagined porch zone. Then you can see you're looking along the porch zone on the right and the center core on the left, and the fireplace becomes a horizontal datum. Then here the fireplace hearth becomes a step to circumnavigate the fireplace, rearticulating again the zone of the porch. If we move back outside, the granite outcropping is now embedded in your reading of the site and really is about defining this in-between zone that we're really interested in. So it's not building, but it's not landscape, but this space in between. And then like a lot of the houses of Arthur's where a building can become a bridge, in a way a ground plane can also become a bridge. And so this very same granite outcropping helps us reimagine other spaces on the same site. So again, if we continue back to Arthur's words, this is a view of the amazing gun turret in the Museum of Anthropology with the incredible Bill Reed sculpture. So Arthur says in the same book, light is as important as sight. No matter what the subject or location, the quality of local light will eventually determine the architectural style. The quest to find the right light, the right architectural form to suit the particular light of a region is a continuing one. And I just feel like that, you know, the kind of idea that, so here you have sight, but then light is kind of right next to it. And that this is such a powerful image. And our revisiting of the Museum of Anthropology yesterday in the kind of evening light raking through the main hall was just breathtaking. And in a way, I know, having visited it, you know, when I was here working, it was amazing, but to see it again and to see it after the kind of reconstruction of the certain pieces to make it more earthquake resistant, it is such a powerful space and so impactful to be in it, around it, and then I feel like the pond and the kind of plant material only adds to the richness of the experience. So it was really just so special to kind of physically be there at that time of the day. So light for Howard and I is a preoccupation. This is an early study model of a sacred space, a synagogue in Portland, Maine. In our work, the reflected ceiling plan is one of the most important elements. So we're always shaping the underside of the ceiling because you're always contributing to the spatial experience of a project. I would say our plans look kind of simple. They're never, often when I see work, the plans can be really agitated and very graphic, and we really work at keeping our plans quite simple because in a way it's the relationship between the plan and the underside of the ceiling that's really creating the kind of spatial experience. Here is a summer camp for a inner city, a dining hall for a camp for inner city kids, and we're using off-the-shelf greenhouse glazing combined with glulam frames and metal tie rods. And then down the center, the 2x4 sticks really connect natural light and ventilation, so it becomes like a light monitor. Here we're using light as a tool in this kind of elevation to capture it through the time of the day. So there's vertical perforations in the facade to really bring light into the main space. In tight urban projects, we're using light to amplify the winter condition and protect ourselves against the harsh summer light. And in a way, I feel like, what's different from being in Toronto to Vancouver is in Vancouver you have seasons, but they're not as pronounced. There's kind of always a hazy thing in the atmosphere. It's raining or foggy. In Toronto, the seasons are so distinct. And for me, my favorite season is the fall because in the late fall, the light is so raking and is so amazing. In this project, we're using deep weathering steel fins that straddle inside to outside to really create, in effect, this depth. And we wanted it to feel like a porch, but the fins are really critical in that reading. And then this is another project on Lake Kawagama where we use a series of Douglas fir-clad trusses combined with clear-story windows on the left side and the views on the right side. So we're really bringing the light in at one level and then giving you views out the other side. And we love, again, this low raking light of the late fall and early winter that penetrates deep into our spaces. So this seasonal change in light is something that helps shape and celebrate our understanding of light. We did a project called the Integral House, and here's some studies of the elevations, looking at how a deeper wooden fin above and a more standardized fin below can actually work to shape the way light enters a performance space. We use 97 different fins to kind of angle and kind of shape the light. And then we documented this main space through all 4 seasons. So this view is spring. And so part of it is the facade becomes, in effect, a kind of curtain, a wooden curtain that's the backdrop for many of the performances. So here we're looking at the verdant green summer. And then our relationship to nature changes in the fall, which is, again, this very dynamic season. And then there's a spatial depth in winter that is really kind of, in winter, that is really different from the fall. And then we live in Toronto, which is at 43 degrees latitude in this seasonal climatic zone. So we're always wanting to harness light as a force to help us continually recalibrate our understanding of place and context. So I would say as architects, we want to paint with light. And so in a way, the fins and the kind of the way that we address the building facade helps us to really address the way light changes through the season. In 2014, we were asked by the University of Venice to draw sections of large-scale sections of parts of our project, the sort of perimeter. And we were one of like maybe 50 architects from around the world that were asked to do the same thing. So you had these large-scale sections and then a photo of each project. So we called our submission Walls of Light. And I'll just show you a couple. This exhibition traveled all over the place, and it was started at the Venice Biennale, but it ended up going out through many venues in Europe. So one of the projects was a synagogue in Portland, Maine, and you're seeing a section through the main sacred space, and we actually created an asymmetrical section enabling the low winter light to enter the space and actually touch the ark, which contained their Torahs in February. So in a way, we're linking light and section to shape space. So here's a view of the synagogue, and you're seeing it, so you can see the asymmetry of it. We work with a reflecting pool, and then this narrow skylight linked to a clear story is part of the way we can shape light. And so inside, we created these, used clapboard, but we inverted the clapboard to create lines of light as opposed to lines of shadow, and it becomes, in effect, a light monitor. In a very tiny studio in Toronto, we're using a super skinny skylight around the edge, and we actually used a kind of low E, sort of super clear glass, a green roof, and every wall is a different thickness. So in a way, this linear skylight is linked to a series of wood coffers, and there's an 8-foot-high datum, and then behind, in the white portion, you have book storage, display, garden equipment storage, but you have this perfectly clean ceiling, and then each depth of the wall creates different light conditions. So in a way, this kind of idea that the depth and the light kind of are linked together. So cadence is a word that's come up through the discussions today, and cadence is one of Arthur's words, and in his words, he described it as the rhythm of a building, and he felt that cadence gives scale and measure and provides the right tempo to a building: stately, graceful, quick, preponderance, gentle, slow. And so this is a view of the Undercroft of Lethbridge. What an amazing project. I was able to visit that a few years ago, and both this experience of being out in the landscape and the coulees looking back at it, and then being in it, and then this view is like you're underneath it, is just amazing. So Arthur goes on to say, structure should emerge out of the rhythmic need, gradually and inevitably as an intrinsic part of the architectural scheme. Structure must be a means, not an end. How well a building expresses its purpose depends on its rhythmic structure, its details, its techniques of expression. I just think this is such a powerful image and such a powerful project. So in the civic space of the Ace Hotel in Toronto that we designed, we created a series of 7 concrete arches that transfer the load from the hotel directly to the lower level. We wanted to create a certain ambiguity of time. So when you come into the hotel, this is the view at the entrance, and visitors enter the space and you can see them scratching their heads, and they're not sure whether the space is a renovation of a pre-existing industrial building or it's new construction. And when that happens, we're really happy because we wanted this ambiguity. This was the first Ace Hotel in Toronto, in Canada. Most of the Ace Hotels had been renovations of existing spaces, and we wanted this kind of uncertainty as to whether it was a renovation or whether it was new construction. We love the cadence and rhythm of a robust structure that results in a series of really interesting spatial conditions and oblique views. So often so much of everything is so frontal, and in a way, the discussion that Eva brought up early on in the first session was she was using the kind of Kyoto entry gate and the idea that you don't see something frontally, but you slide in at the side. And so in a way, I feel like in this project, there is a frontal view, but there are also many opportunities for oblique views that shifts your reading of the same space. So like the kind of discussion also about models, in our studio we continually build with models, And like the Laurel Street studio, they're not beauty objects at all. They're made of chipboard and cardboard. We actually do use glue when we build stuff, but we think of our models as sketches in 3 dimensions. And we cut them up and we rework them. We also sketch and we draw, and Howard and I actually don't use computers as a way of drawing. We actually we're sort of analog, and that's just how it's been. In this project at the Ace Hotel, we wanted to create a civic urban room viewing a local park on the right-hand side. So we had these 7 structural frames that transfer the load, and the lobby, which you're seeing here, is a wooden tray supported by a series of slender rods that you can see on the right-hand side. The visitor slips between the floating wooden lobby on the left and the structural supports that go right down to the foundations on the right. At the lower level, you can see a 3-story art piece called Horizon Line by Howard Sutcliffe. So if there were no buildings between you and the hotel in Lake Ontario, you would be able to see the horizon line and the shimmering waters of Lake Ontario. So this 3-story piece uses weathered plywood, unweathered plywood, stained plywood to place you on the north shore of the Great Lakes, which is part of our interest in situating you and placing you in a location. This is a view from the south end looking north. So you can actually see the floating lobby on the right and then these foundation walls that come right down to the lower level. The stairs and the bars are inserted into the space, wrapping around a series of 7 steel knuckles that provide the transfer again on the other side. So we're really working with asymmetry and then using the knuckles to be another way to transfer the load down to the lower level. And then the final structural bay is actually pulled outside to become the building's entry canopy. So now the next chapter is called Space in Arthur's book. And in a way, this is a view of the Philberg house. And I thought Adele and Leslie and Michael and Clinton did a great job. It was such a really enlightening session. The ability to focus on each house and understand its DNA and its kind of what made it tick, and then to see it within a larger body of houses by Arthur was a really great session and a really lively conversation. So Arthur said in his own words, if musicians are motivated and inspired by beauty, the beauty of sound, and sculptors by the beauty of form, then architects are motivated by the beauty of space. The particular building projects that follow in this book begin with the house, because in my particular space experience, it's inextricably intertwined, the outer land and cityscape with the inner structure, and this relationship is mostly understood in the houses. And then he goes on to say that the Orient has a different view of space, and there's a pattern of, the pattern of space is symbolic, and it is not that of the human path. Spaces are arranged like a series of folding screens that can be put in or down at will. So this is again from his Tundra publication book. So we actually did a Taoist temple. Weird thing to be thinking is what is a Taoist temple at this point in time? So we actually, this is a view of the side walls because it was placed in a residential neighborhood and we wanted to ensure the privacy of the adjacent neighbors. This is a view of the entry to the Wang Dai Sin temple with a series of light monitors that are attached to some operable skylights above, our light monitors, and then they also become an armature to hang these amazing coils of incense that they burn all the time. This is a view of the main space, so you can see the deity that they're worshiping and the deity that the temple is named after. You can see the light monitors, and they support this kind of, these coils of incense. the congregation does Tai Chi, but it's really an extension of Taoism. So Taoism with Confucianism and Buddhism is really amongst the oldest forms of worship in the world. And so we ended up using these deep fins that are shaped of corten steel. And then we were able to use, in effect, windows that were literally the size of doors. It was less expensive, and they could get flow-through ventilation in the main space. This is a view of the underside. So what we ended up doing was we showed them a very sort of crude model of the facade that we were anticipating. And they looked at it and they said, whipped horse. And I was like, what do you mean? And so it was actually a Tai Chi move because it was asymmetrical but in balance. And they really loved it, and they really wanted to have this kind of asymmetry but balance at the same time. So this is a view of the underside of the structure. This is one of two cantilevers. So this is a 5-meter cantilever, and then you're seeing a series of structural frames. They're in pairs, and underneath all of them is a raft foundation tying the whole thing together. And then here you can see the second cantilever, which is 10.7 meters. So this one cantilever acts as a counterbalance for the other, and they're held up by these structural fin walls. So the cantilever becomes a canopy, allowing them to do Tai Chi and connecting the indoor and the outdoor in their sacred space. So I'll continue, and what I wanted to do was to add, so we went through sight, light, cadence, and space. But I wanted to add a few things to Arthur's table of contents. So first, I wanted to add water. I wanted to add multi-scalar design. I wanted to add travel, and then the idea of the megaform. So I'll start off. I would say water is a prominent character that appears in so many of Arthur's projects. And this is the water that Eva was talking about and Barry was talking about on their amazing walking tour, because in a way you have office workers behind and this incredible waterfall. And one of the things about the water that's missing is that my experience of Robson Square, there's this auditory dimension of the water and hearing the water before you ever, so you're at the bottom and you haven't gone up the strats, but you can hear the water before you get to the next level. And so in a way, that's for me such a critical piece of the experience of that remarkable public space. This is a view of Arthur's own residence that's really anchored by the pool, the moon-gazing platform, and water is just an essential part of the experience of his house and garden. So really, Howard and I love to work with water, and we consider it a material in our material palette. This is a very early project, reflecting pool. We also work with water in public spaces. And I think that, it's the issue of maintenance and the challenge of maintaining water and the need to understand how important it is as a dimension of public space really has to be, the fight has to continue, and it's just so critical. This is a public space in Toronto, a reflecting pool and skating rinks that we did, and water was critical. And then also understanding the value of winter water in animating small public spaces. So we're always linking natural pools and reflecting pools and linking inside and outside. And we love the way that winter water is capable of registering subtle shifts of water temperature, transforming the transformation from steam to mist to ice through the course of the day. So in a way, these subtle shifts happen, but we're always so unaware of it. But through water, it can be a register. We also know winter is a long season, so we're always finding ways to celebrate and opportunities for winter water. So this is multi-scalar. So Arthur redefined for many of us the boundaries between architecture and interiors. This is a view of the PMO's office designed by Arthur and his partner Francesco. And in a way, it's I received this photo from the Arthur Erickson Family Archives. And in a way, this idea that it's not just the building and the space, but it's all of the furnishings that make a kind of complete environment. This is a piece from Nian Camper's archives, and you see a photo of Pierre Trudeau because the office that Arthur and Francesco designed took place in 1976. And below that, you can see our Hab chair, which was actually part of the Nian Camper work in 2005. So Nian Camper was the manufacturer and the distributor for this chair. So another photo from the family archives of Francesco on the left, Arthur, and then Klaus Nian Camper. And I don't know if you guys in Vancouver know about Klaus, but he's a pretty amazing guy. And he was really part of establishing modern furniture, not just specifying it, but actually creating it, helping to design it, and then helping to actually fabricate and distribute it. So Klaus was a chair guy. He loved every kind of chair. So he's sitting in our cab chair, and there's our table that went with it to the right. So we worked with Klaus to develop, in effect, this chair that we had done a prototype, a one-off furniture piece, but we worked with him to transform it into a production chair, which was a big challenge for us. So here's a cardboard model of the chair, and then where you're seeing, in effect, a series of these vacuum-formed pieces. And here we're in the Nian Camper fabrication facility in Scarborough. Howard is sitting on one of the many mock-ups. We tested it in wood, we did it in foam, we tested it in plywood, and Klaus is there in the middle, and some of his key guys are with us. And here's a great photo of Klaus where he really was a champion of design, and at the fact that he worked for Arthur and Francesco, but he also kind of worked with a whole range of other designers and really contributed to this kind of whole area of furniture by making it in Canada, designing it and making it and distributing it from a Canadian perspective. And so we worked with them. They had vacuum formed plywood molds that we worked with back and forth. And then this is a view of the chair that we designed in wood. And we also developed a version in metal. And so this kind of idea that, in a way, the furniture and the fittings contribute to a rich spatial experience. So we love making things. So this is an image from our studio of just stuff. You're looking at bronze column bases in the middle, 3D printed fireplace tools, different kinds of hardware, and then the molds to make multiple batches. And so in a way, this kind of scale of work is something that has always interested us, and that we're at a stage of, at this point in time, 3D printing. We do 3D printing in plastic, 3D printing in bronze, 3D printing in stainless, and it's really a way to kind of, for the architect, to really have a level of control over the craft of a building. Alvar Aalto considered a door handle the handshake of a building, and so we experiment a lot with hardware. So this is a series of versions in shaped steel. Here's another series where we're looking at 3D printing in plastic, wood, and then bronze. And so again, this kind of use of the 3D printers to kind of help us to make sure ergonomically it works, and then to kind of figure out the right production techniques. 3D printing in plastic for us has many possibilities. So we were inspired by the powerful Inuit sculptures from the Canadian Arctic. They often use whale vertebrae as their medium for carving. And so we actually ended up doing shaped 3D printing, and then the light is transmitted through the 3D printed plastic as if it were like a whalebone. And so this light is scalable. So here we are using it in a conference room in Hong Kong, and in a way, kind of this idea that the technology allows us to kind of shift scale. We do a lot of custom lights for our project. So here, this is an early prototype. We're combining a mason jar for pickling and preserving fruits and vegetables, and we're using a series of mylar pieces with wire. And so this is a view of the only prototype that exists of this light. But then we developed it further, and we used the mason jar got transformed into scientific glass for lab experiments. We used bronze mesh, and then we used a series of organic shaped resin pieces. So we called this our firefly lamp. And then what we did is we cast in the organic shaped pieces a phosphorescent powder that fishermen uses. And so when you turn the light off, there's a 90-minute afterglow. So we really wanted this kind of illusion of fireflies in a jar, things you do at your summer cottage. And so we're always trying to create a sense of wonder and delight in things that we do. So I think it was mentioned in various presentations that Arthur loved to travel, and it fundamentally shaped his view of the world. This is a photo that I got of Arthur in Florence from the Arthur Erickson family archives. And what I understand is that Florence was one of his favorite spots in all of Europe. He described it as the most perfectly realized city in the world, not only for its art and architecture, but also the history of the city-state itself. In the CCA in Montreal, David Kovo, one of the moderators of the first session, organized a wonderful exhibition really focusing on Arthur's travels and the kind of idea that that would actually be shown at the CCA and highlighted as a really important part of his DNA as an architect is really important. So in a way, for Arthur, the physical presence in a place is really crucial to him to comprehend the essence of a site and a building. And I think that that is really well demonstrated in David's wonderful exhibition. In 1951, Arthur stayed in Florence, and he decided to write to a guy named Bernard Berenson, who was the owner of Villa Itati in the hills in Settignano outside of Florence. So in one of the David Stuke's biography of Arthur, he describes Arthur's intense excitement when he received a reply to his letter and an invitation for tea from Berenson's secretary. So guests at Villa Itati were first invited to stroll the grounds of the 70-acre estate before meeting Professor Berenson. So here's a view of Berenson. I think that's not his wife, it's just a friend of his, but his wife, Mary Berenson, was a key player in developing this incredible collection of Renaissance art and books. So Arthur was amazed by Berenson's multi-room complex library with nearly 50,000 books. Arthur exclaimed, "What a vast consumption the man must have," when he sent accounts back of his visits to his home. After his visit to Itati, so this is a view from the Lemonaya of Itati looking out, Arthur felt that Berenson had devoted himself and his life to connoisseurship, to art criticism, and to creating the most aesthetically beautiful life possible. So his takeaway was the completeness of the environment, the art collection, the library, the grounds of the villa and the villa itself. His worship of art, so tangible in his home and his collection, and especially in the books he had written, embodied for Arthur something like the perfect existence. So in spring of 2025, Howard and I were fortunate to be invited to Villa Itati as artists in residence. So this is a view of that same Lemonaya that we took in May of this year. And so we were the first artists in residence to be architects. So there were filmmakers, painters, musicians, and this view, in effect, would have been the view that Arthur had as he strolled through the grounds. This is a view looking back at that same Lemonaya covered in ivy, and this vantage point of inside and outside is really key. And then behind it, you can see the kind of ochre piece is actually the villa proper, and behind the villa proper is the amazing library that is incredible and is now owned. So Bernard Berenson donated Villa Itati in 1951 to Harvard University, and it is their main Renaissance study center. So it was really great to hang out with all these Renaissance scholars. So then in the time at Itati, there was an amazing garden by Cecil Ross Pinsent. And in a way, what I love about this is the kind of different kinds of greens. And in a way, what I understand is that from Cornelia is that Arthur taught her how to look at greens as a color, and that he wasn't so interested in flowers or kind of large things, but the color green, the texture green, the different types of plant material was really important to him. And in a way, as you wander the grounds of Itati, you're seeing this kind of amazing, sort of architecture. It's landscape, but it's architecture. It kind of fits into this kind of idea that you're using both architectural elements and plant elements to shape space. As also you stroll through the garden, we really appreciated the role of time and weathering and aging that's taking place, the kind of patina of the kind of local walls. And the same Lemonia where Arthur Erickson met Bernard Berenson has been transformed into this amazing place for symposia. So if you're invited to Itati and there's a symposium, this Lemonia space becomes where, scholars from around the world get to meet, and we really fully appreciated all of Arthur's observations from the 1950s about the world that had art and books and gardens and water. If we fast forward to 2003, or move back to 2003, Howard and I were fortunate to spend 2 weeks with Arthur Erickson. So we were invited by Governor General Adrian Clarkson to be part of a circumpolar visit to Finland and Iceland. And this is one of the amazing Icelandic sod houses that contained multi-generational families. So this is a snapshot of Arthur looking elegant as always in Nordic House in Reykjavik, which was designed by Alvar Aalto and then opened in 1968. So for 2 weeks, the architecture delegation, which was Arthur, Howard and I, Gilles Saucier from Montreal, were joined at the hip. We spent every day together, 3 meals a day. We made presentations in Finland and Iceland, and we learned about Arthur's wicked sense of humor. Adrian Clarkson, as Governor General, believed that Canada was a northern country and it needed to connect with our circumpolar neighbors and to share our vision for the arts, for music, for culture. So the image on the left, we're actually in Alvar Aalto's home studio in Munkkiniemi. And then in the image on the right, we are at the exterior of a church by Juha Laviska, an amazing Finnish architect who was a light magician. So you can see Arthur, there's a guy named Curtis Barlow, Howard, Arthur, Gilles. And so we did everything together for 2 weeks. We traveled north of the Arctic Circle to meet the Sami people. We met reindeer herders who used their Nokia cell phones to help them herd the reindeer. And Arthur and I are conversing with one of the local reindeer here. And then together we visited Aalto's Rovaniemi Library in late October. And you can see Adrian Clarkson, Arthur, Gilles is on the left with the camera. And we learned firsthand in these buildings the way Alvar Aalto captures winter light and amplifies them in his buildings. And it was such an amazing time of the year to be in these public spaces. The libraries were full of teenagers and regular people. And then this is one of my favorite shots of Arthur enjoying time in this kind of seminal space, surrounded by books in late October. Each of our 2-week trip, each day was packed. We presented our architectural work at universities, cultural centers in Finland and Iceland. We attended seminars, concerts, tours of buildings. We helped Arthur put together his slide presentations because they were a little bit messy. And Arthur showed up every single day at every single event, always elegant and perfectly fitted out, except for the day we went to visit this geothermal plant outside of Reykjavik. So when he didn't show up, we were so worried. And when we got back to our hotel, we really checked up on Arthur. What happened? Why weren't you there? And he explained that he was having trouble ironing his shirt collar. And he decided not to attend this one event within our 2-week trip because he knew he would not be perfectly fitted out. This was so Arthur. He was so elegant. He was so beautifully appointed and so full of life. And in a way, the fact that he kind of said, well, I just couldn't get the collar right, and I didn't think I could go without that, was just, so special. So now I'm wrapping up, and I'm going to talk about megaforms. So in case you didn't know, the Arthur Erickson archives are located in the CCA, the Canadian Centre for Architecture, the Canadian Architectural Archives in Calgary, and then at McGill University. A few years ago, I found myself in the CCA archives, where I was not in the Arthur Erickson portion, I was in the Kenneth Frampton portion. And here I am in the study center designed by Peter Rose, all of the amazing staff at the CCA, and I was looking through these numerous acid-free boxes that are part of the Frampton Fonds in the archives. And I found a letter, and it was totally unexpected. The letter was dated March 19th, 1999, and it was written by Kenneth Frampton to a woman named Cornelia Hahn Oberlander. So Kenneth Frampton is asking Cornelia for a photo of Robson Square. He wants it fairly high up because he wants to show all 3 blocks. Now, this is a really easy thing to do with drones, but in 1999, it was not easy to deliver. So Cornelia writes him back and says, I don't have this image because all of them are taken like at ground. Some of them are a bit higher up, but not the height that he's looking for. So in this letter, in the first paragraph, Kenneth Frampton goes on to say that he thinks this project, he's talking about Robson Square, is possibly one of the most important urban set pieces carried out in North America since Rockefeller Center. And he's telling this to Cornelia. He's not telling it to Arthur, but he's telling her the reason I want this photograph is that it's such an important public realm piece and just so critical, and he's asking her for this photo. So this photo is a screenshot taken from the lecture that Kenneth Frampton gave in October 23rd, 2017. So quite a few years later, and he is the Senior Loeb Scholar Lecturer at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And his talk is called Megaform as Urban Landscape. So you can see in the lower right is Ken pointing to the screen, big screen, Piper Hall, DSD, and what you see is a view of Robson Square, and it's the fairly high up angle showing the whole development. So he'd been looking for this and asking for this, and in a way what is so special for me is that that first urban corner that was this landscape oasis is at the corner of Robson and Hornby, and that massive landscape was my first kind of experience of Robson Square, entering this kind of amazing, dense, verdant landscape, which is the kind of corner of 2 main streets in Vancouver. So this kind of idea that Kenneth has always been interested in megaforms, and that for him, Robson Square is one of the most defining examples of what he's looking for. And that in the letter he sends to Cornelia, he's thanking her for a lecture she gave at Columbia 10 years earlier. So Ken was the chair of the architecture department, but he's inviting Cornelia as a landscape architect to actually speak about her work and really developing a relationship with her. So in a way, the talk this morning, the kind of walking tour that we had after that, really talks about the importance of Robson Square as a really important public set piece that reshapes our understanding of what Vancouver is, and it's such an important element. And I think that all of the sort of discussion and the questions of maintenance need to be ongoing, and they need to be aggressive, and they need to be tackled, because the project needs to be represented in the way that it was designed. And I think all cities face maintenance issues, and in Toronto we set up something called the Bentway, but it came with a maintenance fund. So part of the gift that was given was that the city of Toronto had to get its act together in terms of maintenance. So here I'm just wrapping up. In a way, in our small studio, we were asked by the Sisters of St. Joseph to design their new home on a ravine edge. So we were really asked to design a megaform, and we were able to capture the line between the city and the ravine. So our project traces and amplifies this contour line that merges from the landscape into the building and out again. And this project redefines the line between the Don Valley and East York, which is a residential neighborhood. So in a way, we created an urban porch. This is the main entry to the project with single-loaded corridors. We worked with an 1850s residence. The sisters asked if we could tear it down or move it. I spent a year convincing them that we could incorporate it into our project. And then in a way, the city side is different from the ravine side. The chapel is located in the heart of the building, surrounded by water, looking outward into the ravine, and it's capped by a green roof, and you can see the CN Tower in the distance. The thin lobby is a series of double peanut column in concrete with a single column. So this asymmetrical pairing of structure, the reflecting pool, and then the chapel on the left. This is a view from the second floor of the chapel, connecting the sisters to their liturgy. And then we're always pushing and pulling the landscape in and out of our spaces. And we're always thinking about this kind of relationship of nature and land and our interior spaces. This is a view of the landscape beyond. And then, like a lot of our projects, water defines the zone between the sacred space and nature. And then nature is visible from the inside out. And the chapel is situated in the reflecting pool facing the ravine. So the Toronto Ravine has been a site for many of our earliest projects. This is our very first garden pavilion and reflecting pool. So imagine your first project has no doors, no windows, and the only mechanical system is a pump for a fountain. In a way, we work with grade beams and trying to keep the trees safe and happy and healthy. And then we work with 1.5 tons of weathering steel, mahogany, concrete, granite. We designed light fixtures, furniture, trying to create a rich spatial experience. So we really like this kind of in-betweenness of architecture and not so much focusing on only buildings or only landscapes, but it's the merging of all of these together. We think about whether our building will transform into a good ruin, and it may be if it's a good ruin, it has a chance of being a good building. So this is a photograph of our first project, but taken 3 decades after. And so in a way, maybe this is closer to how we imagined it with the patina, the kind of sense of time, and the way that nature interacts with concrete. So for us, time is a framework for our experiences within our architecture, and we're always thinking about how our buildings will operate in time. Maybe one of the key aspects of our practice is we've worked on certain sites for 10 years, 30 years, 15 years with the same client doing small projects. So on the same site, we bring the ravine inside through water jet cutting the leaf pattern of a black locust tree out of weathering steel. So the black locust is found in our ravines. It starts in North and South Carolina, and it comes all the way up, skips Lake Ontario, and exists within the ravine. So to see a black locust in our climatic zone is actually very special. So we're linking light and nature, and the vibrant fall leaves actually transform the same space and give it color. So we're always linking nature and culture and trying to interweave them in our work. And we're always reflecting the role of time, light, and space in our architecture. So I just wanted to end with two images. Last summer, we had the privilege of visiting Haida Gwaii. Adele Weeder was super helpful in helping us to craft our trip. So this is a view of the impression of a building that is no longer there, the site of one of the many amazing longhouses. And then during our time, we encountered what's called the nurse tree. And so this is actually a fallen totem pole that's serving as the host for a tree that has grown on top of the totem pole. So this phenomena is present in Haida Gwaii because you have these abandoned villages, these old Haida totem poles that were carved and revered by the Haida people. And then in a way, because of the kind of contact with Europeans, the population declined. And in a way, what you're seeing is that this cultural object of the Haida people provides the nutrients, the moisture, and an elevated platform for a Sitka spruce to have a home. What a remarkable kind of meshing of nature and culture together. So here we are celebrating Arthur Erickson's 100th anniversary. And I believe Arthur is really an amazing visionary architect. And through all of the discussions through the whole day, I would say the thing that resonates most with me is that Arthur changed the way that we see the world. He helped us recalibrate our eyes to see things slightly differently. So I wanted to end this talk with Arthur's words from his 1975 publication, because I think it's so relevant and important. My own sense of space recalls vividly remembered experiences of nature, mountains and lakes, forests, valleys, and sea. The strong landscape of the West Coast has ingrained its poetry into my sensibility, and for better or for worse, conditioned my way of seeing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brigitte. That was phenomenal. I'm being told we have time for one question because I'm so sorry. Who wants to ask? No pressure. No pressure. John, you and we are recording this event so researchers can use this in posterity. John, let me give you the mic. This is John Hemsworth, everybody, local practitioner.
Hi, Brigitte. Thank you so much. It was really amazing. I have a question for you about, it seems to me that there's a clear trajectory between the phenomenological kind of wonder of Arthur's work and your practice, like the materiality, the light, rhythm. It seemed very clear but I don't think it's just the result. I think it's also part of the methodology, the way you go about the work, which was, very clear in kind of the way that you presented or that was talked about today in sort of Arthur's model making and kind of material studies. So I have a personal question. So as a practitioner now, but also as an educator, like you're a prominent educator in the country, and how do you, what do you see as next steps? Like, how do you take this sort of methodology that's so important and take it into what students are doing today, which seems to be, I'm not saying it's not as thoughtful, but it's a different kind of way of kind of thinking about the work. Like, as an educator, how do you pull this great depth of knowledge and methodology into what you're teaching today?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think that students now come from a very different context than when we were educated. I actually, clearly I like students building models, but they don't really like doing that. They actually prefer to be on their computer. And one of the frustrations I have is that the models in the computer are quite scaleless. they can zoom in and zoom out, and I say, okay, print it out, pin it up so we can talk about it. And they don't really like doing it. It's kind of, they have to get up from their desk, and they have to walk over, and they have to go to the printer. And so then in a way, sometimes the first time they see their work, the line weights of their project is when their final review happens. They go, oh my God, it looks like, I said, you should test stuff. Like, so every model that you do is a test. It's just an exploration. And so I feel like this iterative process, whether it's like models or drawings or whatever, it's an ongoing dialogue back and forth. And I feel like one of the things that's so challenging right now as an educator is a lack of understanding of scale. Because you can zoom in and zoom out, and a plan people think they know their plan, they understand it, they think they know their section, but because they haven't tested it in more than one way, it often falls short. And that it's only when they get to like a final review or something that they realize that they really didn't test it enough. They test it maybe once or twice. I'd say test it 20 times, 30 times, because the sense of scale is so missing in contemporary work. And it's something that is not easy you don't just have it. It takes a lot of time to read and understand things. So when they were talking about the model at Robson Square, 1/4 inch, what 1/4 inch means, floor to ceiling height, sections, because that model was so physical that you got it. You also know what 1/16 is, so this ability to kind of read scale and read it at every level is something that is just part of your architectural training. If you were to go into most architecture schools in Canada, when someone says build a model, they'll go to they'll go to the kind of laser cutter, and they'll print a bunch of flat plates that represent ground floor, second floor. I say that's not a model. That's a series of floor plates, but it doesn't tell you the spatial idea of something. So you need to shape it. So the fact that the models were not fancy and they were not meant to be viewed as beauty objects, but they were meant to tell you something about a space. And you could stick your head in, you could look at it with a light coming down, and you could test an idea, is just such an important part of the iterative process. So as an educator, I work really hard at doing it, making sure that my students think about it, understand it, but it's not part of the prevalent, dominant conversation in most studios, in most offices, in schools. And you just, for us, it's just how we live and breathe from, the kind of Laurel Street studio onward, but it's not the norm for how most architecture students think. Models take time, and I gotta get on the transit, and it gets crushed, and I don't like this. And so it's kind of slightly bothersome. But in a way, when you can create a studio culture, it's kind of really, really interesting, and it's really important. And then we've morphed that into 3D printing and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. So if you come to our studio, a lot of architecture studios look like they're accountants. They're all super neat, and they all have, big screens and long white desks. And I go, wow, this is so neat. What do you guys do here? Because it just doesn't, there's no messiness, because everything is so packed into the digital space. And it's an amazing tool, and it has great uses, but you need to counter that with other things that make you understand scale as an architect, because that's part of what you do. So I hope that answers.